Hey, so I'm out in the garage working on the Mustang, and I've been messing around with the suspension. Alright, so out there on YouTube somewhere, there's a video that shows the guy who lifted a blue Mustang, and he used these coilover springs over the struts and a really cool kit, but that was definitely not in my price range. I happen to have these springs sitting around from a different project. They're 14-inch, 175-pound per inch springs, and I figured how hard could it possibly be just to throw one of these springs over the strut and make a homemade coilover. So it was a little bit tougher than I thought, not to put the spring over the strut, but to actually get the lengths right for mounts. Go into a ton of detail about how difficult it was through trial and error how to match up a coilover spring with a stock Mustang spring to get different coil rates and to figure out how much suspension bump, how much suspension drop, and then what spring rates would be overall. I had to basically keep moving back and forth until I could get the final combination of what worked best for me. Alright, so it's a 2.5-inch inner diameter coil spring, so it fits over the strut just fine, but you know that's going to get too sloppy, so I had to make these special adapters. These adapters aren't anything fancy. They're just regular secondary steel from the scrapyard, pretty much sewer pipe. But if you can get the right dimensions, you can get a 2.5-inch outside diameter, or at least really close. Fits right inside, and then you get the next closest size that will fit around that 2.5-inch pipe, and there you go. That fits in there nice and smooth. This inner diameter is very close to 2 inches, which fits right over the strut here. This is actually the bottom mount that sits on the strut. You can see a couple grooves right there fit onto there, and then the other adapter is what's going to go in the top. So I had to do the same kind of thing. This will mount in the top of the spring, and then I don't know what the part is called, but this piece of the strut that goes up into the bracket that keeps the strut centered, that just fits snug on top. In my second round, I'm actually going to tack weld this in place because it does get a little bit sloppy, but for now, that's what I did for version 1. So here's everything stacked on top, and you can pretty much see problem number 1 right away. So cutting the dust shield off, I actually exploded this strut and had to do something else with it. But as you can see, there's not a lot of extension in this. So when I had it installed, there was only 1 inch of drop, and suspension was constantly hitting its limit to drop. So this was not a very good setup, so that's why I'm working on to this next version of the suspension. Alright, so I've got 2 different kind of struts here. The black one on the right is the stock, I'm going to guess 94 and up, or 93 and up, whatever that split is in the SN95. I had to actually add these extenders. So all I did was plate off from using the bottom hole as a guide and just coming down that same distance, and it kind of beefed up and it worked pretty well. Overall, all that does is when you add your 2-inch spacer to the subframe, this lowers the strut so you still have the same amount of travel. And then the strut on the left is from a 93 and earlier, the Fox body, I believe. There are some differences here. The original strut sat way lower in the mount, so I had to grind off a lot and slide it quite a ways up into that sleeve. And that's how I'm going to make up the difference instead of using these extender plates. Alright, so adding all this lift made some crazy alignment problems, and then to maximize what I could get out of the suspension, I had to modify the upper strut mounts a little bit. So what I did is, to make a spacer, I wanted to basically take two of these, put a piece of pipe in between, and then just mount them in place. So for the originals, I had to cut this junk out. This will be the new top plate. And then I would take a spacer like this somehow, have one welded to the bottom and one welded to the top. And then what happened is I came up with something crazy like this. Now, this is the one for the other side, so it's not quite done yet. But essentially, it just fits over the original mount, and it adds that spacer, and it's got a little bit of angle to it to correct that alignment. It looks really goofy up close, but by the end, who cares, because this is an off-road Mustang, so nobody's really getting that too excited about it. Some blue touch-up paint. Alright, so now we start to assemble the strut. First we got the spring spacer, then we've got the keeper. Grab these two little guys. And then we got an isolator, and we'll just throw that piece up there. Alright, so let's take a look in the wheel well at some of the work done to prepare for installing this coil over strut. Up front before, I ran these 2-inch wheel spacers. That was just to give the stock wheels and wider tires some more clearance from the suspension components. The original lift came from this 2x2-inch tube between the subframe and the cross member there. Had to move the brake line back a little bit and massage some of those lines a little bit to get it to clear. And then, of course, very important is some sort of limiting device, because you can yank that rod right out of the strut if you give it too much suspension drop or whatever. And then in addition to that, I also had to move these fuel brake lines out of the way, and then had to beat the living crap out of the firewall and then stitch it back together with whatever booger weld I could. So this is not the proudest welding moment, but it did make a lot of clearance for these bigger tires. Alright, well, it took me a couple of days to get everything put back together, take the car out for a drive to make sure it all worked fine. I'm going to show a couple more pictures of how everything went together, and I really hope that this video helps you with your project.